Getting the thumbnail for this video is so difficult, like my arms absolutely kill. Ugh.
A few moments later.
Anyway, now that's been dealt with Halloween coming up around the corner, October can be quite a scary month. And I've noticed that nothing scares BookTube more than big books. And I get it, people want to flex by having a high book count, and therefore people see it as more time effective to read many little books rather than one big one. Which I think is a discussion to have in itself, because we shouldn't be trying to like show off for the number of books we read, we should just be reading books that are actually good. But fear not, I'm going to give you my favourite big books to hopefully lessen your fears. All the books I'm going to mention in this video, according to Goodreads, is 450 pages and above, which in my opinion are big books. And I'll be listing them in order of size, starting from the smallest go all the way up to the biggest. And if you're new to the channel and you haven't seen my face before, hello, welcome, I'm Katerina, it is lovely to see you here. If you like content about books and don't mind someone like me yapping about them, then I think you should consider subscribing. And all that being said, let's get into the video. The very first book coming in at 476 pages is Freshwater for Flowers by Valerie Perrin. This is a moving novel of a woman living alone as a cemetery keeper, and she's been doing this job for 20 years. And since the day she started, her life is pretty routine. She tends the graves, she comforts the deceased's visitors, and she also hangs out with her colleagues, which include a priest and a couple of grave diggers. And I'm not gonna lie, even though I'm sure this book romanticized it, I actually looked into doing this job after I finished the book because it sounded so appealing to me. But I didn't get very far, so I guess I have to stick to my corporate job. But anyway, one day this woman's life is disrupted when a visitor confides her in a heartbreaking secret that ultimately breaks through her very carefully built emotional defenses, where she learns that she can actually love again. In my opinion, this book is the most perfect story. It honestly covers so many huge themes, including life, marriage, motherhood, death, loss, grief. And I honestly felt like each theme was explored to its full extent, because the size of the book didn't let anything feel rushed and actually had time to develop and explore these themes. And it also included several wild plot twists that honestly had me rolling. And whilst at times it is a sad novel because it does delve into some pretty heavy concepts, it's also surprisingly moving and light, and even made me laugh at some points. It's just an exceptional novel that honestly brings out the magical in the ordinary, which to be honest is a reason why it's one of my favourite books, because I'm such a sucker of romanticizing life. And honestly, this book did not feel like it was almost 500 pages long. It honestly felt like it was around 300. Maybe because the pacing was really well done as well, so I didn't feel like it was dragging at all. But yeah, just a fantastic book, which is actually one of my favourite evers and one that I would just never fail to recommend. The second book on my list, coming in with 4 more pages at 480, is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. So set in Sweden, this is a mystery crime novel that follows a investigative journalist and also a troubled hacker. And they're hired by a man from this very rich but dysfunctional Swedish family to solve the mystery of what happened to his niece who disappeared 40 years ago. However, the more this duo digs for clues, the more sinister crimes they uncover. This book is thick with themes of corruption, misogyny, and injustice. If you've been following me a while, you probably have noticed that I don't really read a lot of crime or mystery novels. And I think it's because I personally find them a bit predictable, like I always end up guessing what happens before I get to the end of the book. But in this book, I had no clue what was going to happen, and it made it so good. Because it is a big book, it had so many complex plot lines, which in theory should have made it feel more messy and confusing, but it was honestly executed so well. And because of the length of the book, it allowed for the details to be really fully fleshed out. So as you're reading, you're so familiar with the case that like you're trying to figure it out and crack the code as well. And it was also just super suspenseful. Like I was just honestly on the edge of my seat while I was reading this. I actually read this book years ago at like this old job I had where I would often cover the reception. And I don't know if I should admit this, but at times the reception got really quiet and I'd be really sneaky and like read the book under the desk because it was so gripping and I just had to find out what happened next. The characters were also amazing. They were also unique and complex, especially the hacker. I was like obsessed with her. I honestly felt like she brought such a fresh perspective to women in detective fiction. She's dark and introverted, but also so intelligible beyond belief. Like, oh my god, who is this diva? But yeah, overall, an amazing book. And if you like crime and mystery novels, then definitely read this one because it is fantastic. For my next book, this may seem a bit juvenile, but you know what? Just because a book is in the young adult genre doesn't make it bad. The point of reading is to enjoy what you're reading. So the next book on my list, coming in at 541 pages, is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This novel is the prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy that was actually released a few years ago, and the story is set decades before Katniss Aberdeen and we follow a young President Snow, where we basically witness his villain arc. We see what makes him become so evil. And in this novel, he actually mentors a tribute in the 10th Hunger Games, and we basically witness him fall in love with her. And we see the author delve into themes of power, ambition, and survival. I hate to say it, but I love a villain origin story. We read so much about the good guys that I actually find it more intriguing and chilling to see what makes someone bad. And I feel like this book got a lot of hate from when it was initially released. Because let's be honest, we see enough middle-class, white, rich men in power nowadays that like no one really cares about how they got there. We want to root for the rebels instead. But to be honest, I thought this book was really important because it adds so much layers and depth to the later Hunger Games trilogy. We see Panem in the earlier days and the games in their infancy. We witness the government's psychological aspects of power and control and how they're used to our main character's advantage. I also love books that blend a fast-paced plot with political narratives, and I just think that this one did it so well. Plus, I think that the film that came out last year is honestly one of the best book-to-film adaptations I have ever seen. I must admit though, I didn't really love the ending that much. I felt like it wasn't as fully fleshed out as it should have been. But I still think overall it was a good book, and if you loved the original Hunger Games trilogy and you haven't read this yet, then I think you definitely should because I think it just adds so much more. The fourth book on my list, coming in at 544 pages, is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is a historical fantasy novel that follows a small group of elite students, and they all study at Oxford's Royal Institute of Translation, otherwise known as Babel. And the story is narrated by one of these students, and we follow him through a series of events that essentially tell the story of how England has kept its colonial powers to uphold the problematic British Empire. The book also has themes relating to power as well as rebellion and resistance, but it also has interesting narratives on colonialism and Western supremacy. From that synopsis, you can tell that this book covers some pretty big and heavy topics, and I feel like the author did the absolutely correct thing in making this a chunkier book because it allows the reader to really explore these topics in depth. We follow the main character, who is a Chinese boy attempting to fit in into a very prejudiced England. We see him trying to establish himself and make ties to those around him who don't necessarily want to associate themselves with him. And personally, as a woman of colour, I really appreciated having a longer book to like fully go into and dissect this main character's feelings and personal opinions on this, because it was honestly something that I felt like I could resonate to. Because it's complicated feeling like an outsider and trying to belong in a place where not necessarily everyone wants you. I also feel like the length of this book allowed you to really understand some of the other character motivations that happened. Therefore, the ending doesn't feel like as shocking because you could kind of understand that like what rooted these reasons and seeing them play out. I'm trying really hard not to give spoilers here because I feel like if you haven't read this book, it's better to go into it without knowing anything. Out of all these books I'm going to mention, I would honestly say to read this one now because it is very dark academia themed and just perfect to read for autumn. And overall, it is just a fantastic book that I definitely would say warrants the amount of pages that it has. Okay, we're halfway there, and the next book coming in on my list at 559 pages is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Sorry, this is another book I recommend so often, but it is actually my favorite book of all time, so sorry, I am going to mention this again. This novel is a deeply complex psychological thriller that, again, similar to Babel, follows a small group of students all studying at an elite liberal arts college. And the story is narrated by a boy who becomes involved in this exclusive group, all studying ancient Greek. And at the very start of the novel, we find out that one of their friends has just been murdered, and we follow the twisted and chilling events that lead up to this person's murder, as well as the very chaotic aftermath. This novel is rich in themes of morality, classical beauty, and intellectualism. This is one of those books where I just did not mind the length at all because the author's writing was just so beautiful, descriptive, and wonderful that every single page felt like a masterpiece, and it was an honor to read every single crafted sentence. Which I know sounds so dramatic, but I just feel like I need to emphasize why I love this book so much. I've read this book twice, and I even appreciated it more on its second read just because of how great it was. And I sound mental saying this, but I actually wish that the book was longer. And I was genuinely sad when it ended because I was just so obsessed with it, and I was left in such a reading slump when I finished. And this author only releases a book like once every 10 years, and it shows because you can literally see the time and effort spent literally writing every single sentence because it's all just so well done. But yeah, I talk about this book enough on this channel, and I'm sure you're sick of hearing it, but you get the gist of why I like it, and it's just great that it's a big book that you could just really get yourself lost in. The sixth book on my list, coming in at 671 pages, is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I actually saw a guy reading this on the tube yesterday, and I wanted to go up to him and be like, I read that book, it's so good. But I didn't want to weird him out, so instead I'm here yapping about it instead. So that being said, this book follows a destitute and desperate former law student, and he wanders through the slums of St. Petersburg, and one day he commits an act of murder for money without any remorse or regret, because he imagines himself to be beyond the conventional moral laws. But because of these actions, he therefore embarks on a dangerous cat and mouse chase with the police, until the main character is ultimately overcome by his own guilt. Initially, I was so unsure about reading this book because I was just like, why would I want to read 700 pages about some bloke feeling guilty about a murder? But oh my god, this book is so much more than that. It includes the most thought-provoking and heart-wrenching commentary on so many various aspects in life, including philosophy, politics, society, morality, religion, etc., etc. Like, Dostoevsky must have been having an existential crisis while he was reading it, because honestly, by the end, this book left me spiraling. And the book is the perfect length because it allows you to fully have the time to delve into these narratives and fully explore and think about what he's saying. And even with all this existentialism aside, the plot was really suspenseful. I was constantly on the edge of my seat wondering if he was going to get caught or not. And it's such an eye-opener of a book because not only does it show the human capacity for committing evil acts, but also our ability to feel shame and remorse, and it left me wondering if this was the main reason why we were so different from other creatures on Earth. So yeah, big thoughts that I'm sure the guy on the tube was having as well. But amazing book, and if you feel like you're due some sort of crisis, I would definitely recommend you read this book. The seventh book on my list, coming in at 724 pages, is The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. So this story, set in Kerala, India, spans over the years of 1900 to 1977, and it follows 3 generations in one family that all seem to suffer from a very peculiar affliction, and it's that in every generation at least one person dies by drowning. This novel explores a range of different themes, including family, tradition, legacy, grief, love, sacrifice, as well as tackling some pretty heavy subjects, including colonization, discrimination, and addiction. I love taking chunky books on holiday because I feel like it is the perfect time to get lost in a long, good story. And I took this book to Mexico earlier this year, and it was the most perfect story to take on holiday. It just had one of those very beautifully rich and immersive stories that you could just get lost in. It had gorgeous, immersive writing, a very elegant prose, and just the most beautiful descriptive detail to make it feel like you're actually in the book. I was initially put off by how many years this book spanned over because I was like, oh, this is going to get very slow and boring and probably confusing. But it wasn't. If anything, it was super interesting. There was so much commentary on the portrayal of India under British rule, and by having a long story, you can see how India developed into this independent nation, which I found really interesting because I thought it was very informative despite this being a piece of fiction. Like, I didn't learn any of this in school. Like, the UK education is very much just like, woo, Britain's amazing, and we fought off the Nazis and World War II. And that's it. We don't see any of the bad side of the UK coming to these different countries and the effect that it had on people. But anyway, overall, this was a great book, fantastic chunky read, definitely to take somewhere if you're going to be going somewhere hot. And finally, the very last book on my list, coming in at 771 pages, is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. Yes, this is the same author that wrote The Secret History, but you know what? She's so good, I just had to put her twice on this list. This story revolves around a boy from New York who, at the beginning of the book, is involved in a terrorist attack at a museum, and amidst the chaos, he steals a very famous painting. And we essentially follow this boy grow into a teenager and then a man throughout the span of the novel, and we follow him on his various journeys through loss, love, friendship, and crime. This book is full of themes of grief, redemption, and the impact of art on human life. As already mentioned, I love this author's writing so much. The way she writes everything in just such a romanticized detail is just a marvel to behold. It makes you feel like you yourself are living through every single detail of this boy's life. Her prose is just consistently beautiful. The way she manages to blend such poetic descriptions with raw emotions is just incredible. I also loved her exploration into art as a whole and how it impacts us. How art can inspire and heal, but also at the same time destroy and torture us. I feel like I read a lot of books about books just because everyone in the publishing industry just loves books, but I feel like it's so rare to read about classical art, which honestly just felt really refreshing. And I know some people complained about this book being so long and kind of drawn out at times, which I guess, yeah, but I still thought it was an incredible piece, and honestly, I thought it was quite a page turner. I never once had the itch to just like finish this book because because, as mentioned with The Secret History, every single sentence read just felt amazing. I was enjoying each page as I was reading it. I didn't feel the need to just like flick to the end of the book because I was just done with reading it. Like, I get it, reading a book that's almost 800 pages long is terrifying to some people, but honestly, this is just one book that I would really, really recommend you read. And there you have it. Those are my favourite lengthy big books. I hope this has slightly reduced your fear of big books because these are the ones I would definitely recommend worth reading. I also recently heard that I think it was Storygraph that does this thing where it counts your pages read in a year rather than your books, which I think is so much better. I think that's something that the book community needs to embrace more because I don't think flexing with the amount of books you've read in a year is really that productive, because I just feel like that encourages people to miss out on absolute masterpieces that will honestly change your life if you just give it a go. But anyway, have you read these books? If so, what did you think of them? And if you haven't read these ones, let me know which are your favourite big books in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and it kind of reduced your fears on big books, then please give it a like down below. And if you're new here, why don't you consider subscribing? I make new videos every single Tuesday. Feel free to also follow me on Goodreads, where I update what books I'm reading in real time. And feel free to also follow me on Instagram. I post a bit more personal stuff on there, but I also post about books as soon as I finish reading them, so you can see what they're about and also what I've rated them out of 10. I also hope that you enjoyed the fit. This is kind of like the spookiest outfit I have, so I kind of hope it went with the video. But that being said, thank you so much for being here and your continuing love and support, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!